All right, so today I'm going to be tying a very simple, traditional California steelhead style fly. I like throwing this thing in the winter through the spring on a single hand rod with an intermediate line, just slowly stripping it through the estuaries. You can also swing this thing when conditions are low and clear. And I've also caught quite a few trout using this, both in rivers and definitely still water. So we are tying on a traditional steelhead salmon hook. This is made by Arex, but you could use an Alec Jackson or any other, traditional steelhead salmon iron. And for the tail, this was traditionally tied with polar bear dyed black. And since that stuff is almost impossible to find nowadays, you can use the hairline polar bear substitute. You could use calf hair or bucktail, and you could even use synthetic if you wanted to go that route. Most of these patterns call for the tail to be about 1.5 times the length of the hook shank. I like to go a little bit smaller, but you still want a fairly substantial tail hanging off of that thing. And we're going to tie that in nice and tight. I like to give it a few wraps to try to keep that tail together and not just flying everywhere. Cut that off nice and clean. And for the body, we're going to take some plain black chenille in the medium size. Go ahead and tie that in. Try to tie it in nice and tight and flush with the hook so you don't have a big old bump hanging off the back there. And then take your thread back towards the head of the hook. Keep all those tail fibers out of there, and then wrap that chenille towards the front of the fly to create the body. And you could throw in some wire wraps over this if you wanted to keep it, or if you wanted to get it a little heavier. I'm typically throwing these in shallow estuaries or low and clear rivers, so I like to keep it nice and light, which allows you to use a very slow strip on an eye line and try to talk one of these fish into eating it. Give it a few wraps to tie it off. Cut that chenille off nice and clean. And then give yourself a nice base to create the collar of this fly. And for the collar, we're going to use a fairly substantial piece of grizzly hackle. Cleaned off the base of this thing. Go ahead and tie that in. So once we've got that tied in, we're going to go ahead and palmer that towards the eye of the fly. And as you do this, keep all of the other fibers out of the way of the next wrap by pulling them back towards the tail. And this is much easier to do with hackle pliers rather than your hands, but just feeling a little risky today. Once you get up to where you want to and you have the size collar you'd like, go ahead and tie that grizzly hackle off and then pull everything back towards the tail and give it a few wraps on the base of the hackle fibers so that we get that nice kind of umbrella look to it. Then we can go in there and trim the remainder of that grizzly hackle off. Make sure we've got it all looking like we want to. And the tail is not very pretty on these flies when you're using this type of material. but when it's wet, it looks super fishy. So from there, we're gonna whip finish her off. And the key to getting a good looking head on these traditional steelhead salmon flies is to take a little bit of the UV clear fly finish and flow, and just a drop because it comes out quick. Just throw that right on the thread, trying to keep it out of the eye of the fly. And we're going to bake that in. That'll get us that nice glossy looking head. This flow only takes a few seconds to bake in. And there you have it. Kind of an estuary bugger. Great for stripping with a single hand rod and down towards tidewater for winter steelhead. Works great for trout as well, and you can even swing it in low and clear conditions out there on the coast.